All right, so hopefully you enjoyed not only my little lecture, but the videos that I linked for you to check out that illustrate some of these concepts in a little bit more detail. Um, Another sin of commission is our tendency towards suggestibility. We draw inferences that might be based on the cues that were provided to us. Um, a lot of times when we're at, sometimes I'm mid sentence and I think, oh my gosh, this just happened to me. Like in the middle of a sentence, because I was going to say, sometimes we're asked a question and we assume that embedded in that question is like the right answer. I've got right sort of in quotation marks. Like I should give a particular kind of answer. I can tell from the question you're asking me that I'm supposed to say a particular thing. We rely on those kinds of cues, right? A person asks us, they must have some reason for asking that. They must want something, or they must already know the correct answer. They're waiting to see if I'm going to say the same thing, or right. We use those retrieval cues to help guide us towards what we should be thinking or what our processing should be, what we should be focusing on. And so our inferences can draw us down particular pathways in our semantic or neural network. We maybe will take on what the person is indicating by the form of the question that they're asking, and that will cloud our judgment about the details that we're pulling out of our own memory. Um, it also could be that, we already know information. We have a life experience. We already know things that are related to these cues. And based on that related knowledge, we may draw inferences about what must be going on, or what is likely to happen next, or how this information will be used. And that can cause us to be quite suggestible. So there's an example here in this Scientific American Frontiers video. You'll watch that in the playlist. And it's also related to one of the labs that you'll be doing. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. What I wanted to emphasize was that this tendency that we have to draw inferences and start to think in a particular part of our semantic network and stuff is that it has big implications for eyewitness testimony, right? I mean, if you think about it, if you're a person who witnessed, a crime or an emergency or something like that, and you're being asked to explain what you saw or what you smelled or what you felt, you're supposed to just explain your direct experience. The fact that we tend to draw inferences makes us quite suggestible, makes it likely that the act of questioning us can actually change our memories. The act of asking us questions can cause us to ignore certain relevant details and focus on maybe some irrelevant details, or overemphasize part of the information at the expense of other aspects of the information. And so eyewitnesses can be quite fallible. A lot of research on this has been going on for the past probably 50 years, and it's changed the way that eyewitnesses are interviewed most of the time. Because eyewitness testimony is the most believed by juries, but also the most fallible kind of evidence that can be provided in a court case. And so we want to try and bring into alignment the trust that the jury has for the eyewitness, and then the accuracy, right? Eyewitnesses tend to be more confident than correct about their recollection of what happened. Um, there are just so many examples that we can give of times where eyewitnesses confidently describe a suspect, and it turns out the suspect doesn't look anything really, honestly, anything like the description. They were wearing different clothes, their hair color was something different, their height was different, they weighed something different, right? But the eyewitness will remember all these details that are not accurate. And so part of it is the act of being an eyewitness, right? You're under stress. Usually, if you're an eyewitness, you're under some degree of stress. You either were the victim or you were the person who saw something happening that was scary. And so you're probably not in your best mindset to be encoding things anyway when you're an eyewitness. But then you pile on like interviewing tactics and letting eyewitnesses be in the same room and talk to each other so that they start to like normalize their experience and they start to agree on certain things that they all remember, and nobody really focuses in on the one eyewitness who has this detail that would be like critical to understanding what happened in the situation. That eyewitness notices no one else is talking about it, and so they sort of assume it must not be important, and they don't even tell the authorities, right? These are the kinds of errors that we're trying to figure out how good interviewing techniques can maybe get around. So, cognitive psychologists are playing a really big role in helping the criminal justice system to do a better job, especially of dealing with eyewitnesses, so we don't get tainted testimony. So here's a great example from Brain Games of eyewitnesses making errors. So make sure you watch that in the playlist. Just to wrap up these seven sins of memory. So we have these omission ones that we've talked about. We have these commission ones that we have talked about. And these seven things together can contribute to forgetting, to failing to encode, remembering something that isn't really accurate because we've brought in our expectations and all those things, or misattributed, or we were suggestible. And so, hopefully, these seven sins are something that we can all work on. The good news is that, like I said, even when they're present, they don't usually harm our memories in a very meaningful way. But they can cause like disagreements between two people who had the exact same experience. Think about if you have a sibling. Think about a time when you and your sibling experience something together and have vastly different recollections of what happened. You're convinced you're right. Your sibling is convinced that they're right. And I'm just, as a person who was not there and don't even know who you are, I'm going to say you're probably both wrong. Right? None of our memories are perfect. None of our memories are completely faulty, right? We each notice the part that's relevant to us. We tend to take on other people's suggestions pretty easily. And so I would like to argue the same thing Daniel Schachter said, which is maybe what we should say is, I believe I recall, right? That's a pretty safe way of dealing with the fact that our memories are pretty faulty. Okay, so speaking of that, let's go ahead and transition into autobiographical memory. So, autobiographical memory is your memory of your particular experience across your lifetime, right? So, that time you went to an amusement park, right, and rode that roller coaster, like that's a specific autobiographical memory. It's usually a specific life event, like you have an autobiographical memory that you went to an amusement park. You may have a very specific memory for the time that you rode that roller coaster. And that is probably held in your episodic memory store, right? You have this fear component or excitement component, or you probably remember what the weather was like. You probably remember who you were with, all these details. That's all in your episodic memory store. Autobiographical fact, here's the stork bringing you to your parents, um, the day that you were born. These are general knowledge about yourself, your own personal history. Like you know your birth date, but you don't remember your birth date. It's a fact. It's not your personal memory. It's context free. Your parents may have been the sort who every birthday they told you your birth story, and for them it's an autobiographical memory, and it's something very specific that they hold in their episodic memory store, and they remember how they felt. Mom probably has details about your birth that maybe you don't want to hear, and like very context full for them, but for you it's context free. It is just a fact that that's the day you were born, whatever the date is, right? And these kinds of memories are held in our semantic memory store. unrelated to emotion, unrelated to any, kind of, context or any bigger picture. It's just a series of facts. So you know your name, these things that are just things that have always been details about you that you didn't actively participate in as the thing was happening or whatever. Those are autobiographical facts. So when we talk about a memory versus a fact, the experience of remembering, like having to retrieve it and find it in your memory and pull out details, is always present when you are retrieving an autobiographical memory and is rarely present when you're retrieving an autobiographical fact. Things like what is your name, how old are you, what's your birth date, those things tend to come out of you without any effort or searching. It's just something that you can say. Your personal interpretation is very frequent in autobiographical memory, so you're going to have that, you interpreting what this event meant or whatever. Whereas in autobiographical facts, that's rare. It just is what it is. You don't interpret it. Generally, it is what it is. The truthfulness of your autobiographical memories are variable. It may or may not be true, but it's your version of what happened. Autobiographical facts tend to be truthful. I mean, these are facts. They're like on your birth certificate kind of facts. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to quibble with. And I think it's one of the reasons why when a person finds out that like what's on their birth certificate is not accurate, it's distressing because autobiographical facts are supposed to be high in truthfulness. They are supposed to be here they are in writing. It is what it is. And so when it is not what it is, it's very distressing. Some context specific sensory attributes are always present in autobiographical memory. So, we're talking about in that, remembering whether it was warm or cold out, remembering, what the chili dog tasted like, remember, like those kinds of context specific sensory attributes. Those are always present in autobiographical memories. Like you remember what was going on very specifically. Whereas with autobiographical facts, you really don't have those. You tend to reference yourself a lot in autobiographical memories. Oddly enough, you reference yourself when you're retrieving information about yourself too. These autobiographical facts, that's all about you. The autobiographical memories can be years and years ago. You can have very specific autobiographical memory that are really old, but that's true for facts too. I mean, your birth date is certainly for your life about as far back as you can go, right? The transition tends to be that an autobiographical memory can emerge over into becoming an autobiographical fact, where something that had been very, you know, context specific, and you experience a sense of retrieving the details, and all that stuff was true, but the longer ago it happened and the more times you've told the story, the more likely it is that it's moving into just a fact. And the biggest thing that starts to get lost is the context specific sensory attributes, right? You start to lose all those little nuances of how it felt, how you felt, how, all that stuff starts to get lost, and you start to tell the story like it's just a fact. It's no longer this rich memory, it's just a fact about yourself. And, anything that is, probably old enough is one of the key factors. Something that you've told the story a lot can become this sort of disembodied fact over time and lose its memory status. So hopefully that clarifies the difference between autobiographical memories and autobiographical facts. All right, let's go ahead and take a break here, and in the next video we'll talk about how we study autobiographical memories.